In today's episode, Ryan and I discuss Nelson Nash, his contributions to the financial world, economics, and the life insurance industry in particular. Of course, we discuss our relationships. Now, this was recorded in April of 2019, so it may be too soon, but we enjoyed it. We had fun. We hope you enjoy it, and thank you for listening. Welcome to the Banking with Life podcast. My name is James Neathery. I'm your host, and
I'm Ryan Griggs, your co-host.
Perfect. So, today we're going to have a discussion about Nelson Nash.
Mm-hmm.
And really it's just a recorded discussion between us that we're inviting people to listen into if they choose or would like.
Yeah, it's kind of a long time coming too. I mean, here we are now recording in May of 2019. And so it's been over a month since Nelson passed away.
Graduated, as he would say, right? And he passed the pleasantries and had a conversation with his brother, about the IDS thing. Why didn't you tell me about this? Why didn't I buy more life insurance, kind of a deal? But and this surely, this is not going to be, completely comprehensive or completely inclusive. There's, the effect that Nelson has had on us individually, and so Nelson will be woven throughout the rest of our lives in our story.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's been a month, and it's really taken that long. And even now, like you say, it's not complete yet, but just reflecting on the magnitude and the breadth of his impact on each of us, on me personally, as I've reflected about him, really every segment of my life, from spirituality, becoming a Christian, to academic life, leaving a PhD program, and then professional life, starting in infinite banking, and even the reason I'm here today, right? Sitting across from you.
Yep, no question.
I mean, he really brought us together. So it's almost hard to think of a avenue or aspect of life that Nelson has not left his imprint on in my own life, and just capturing the gravity of that is almost hard to put into words. The impact he's had, and then the impact he's had on just my family and my clients as well. I mean, you can think of from all sorts of angles, just the amount of death benefit that's in force because of him, but then the access to capital that people have and will have as they live out the rest of their lives, and all the other people who will, fall into that same category. It's like,
that's a lot of people.
Whoa. Yeah. And I wasn't even really, usually I'm hardly ever at a loss for words, but when he first passed away, I was like, I didn't even know how to describe, how that made me feel or what that meant. And so it's even taken this amount of time to get to this point where I think we feel that it's enough time has passed, but we've also had sufficient time to consider what he's meant in order to be able to have a discussion about it in the first place.
Right. I know. Excuse me. For me, it's kind of, it's informational. They're kind of still in the information. Of course, I'm knowledgeable that, he passed away. We attended the services, and, and it's, he's not going to, you're not going to have the opportunity to be egocentric, self-centered for a moment. You don't have the opportunity to, have that phone call or, complete a project or complete a discussion or a thought process. So it goes, it's kind of, for me, yes, I'm knowledgeable, and it's moving from, excuse me, I worked out hard this morning. It's going from, I'm still in that, wow, really? Should quit smoking. I don't smoke. Going from, they're still in transition, really going from that informational kind of mode, what it really means, how it's going to affect me. Looking at, it's very easy or simple to look at, what you've lost, what you don't have, what you can't have in the future, etc. But, beyond that, it's been quite enjoyable for me remembering, all of the good things, right? All of the time that you did have, the things that you did do, the conversations that you did have, not on what you don't have, kind of a thing. And, just like you said, that he was very impactful throughout his life in many areas. The infinite banking concept is just one aspect of what he, impacted. All right.
And like we were talking out by your pool the other day about, all the things that you wish you could have asked, and, all the questions you could have answered, and all the perspective that we didn't get an opportunity to hear from him,
Yeah, OMG, you think about that, 15 years, in my case, I'm grateful, appreciative to have the 15 years of, a relationship that developed over that time, and it was a pretty close relationship, and all of the things that you did discuss, and all of the things that you did discuss, and then, when he passes, you suddenly think about all of the things that you didn't discuss.
And it's like, wow, there's still so much more.
Right.
Yeah. And to the point where I think it would have been impossible to cover everything. I think so. You had 15 years. I had 3. I met him in spring of 2016 and spoke and saw him regularly. He would call me and I'd call him, and also see him in person, like when he visited here and at the various seminars. But, most of that was me listening to him, share whatever topic we were talking about, be it finance or history or Christianity or any of those. And then I think about, gosh, I could have just sat there and listened for the rest of my life.
Sure. To
everything that he had learned and what he would have to share. So it's...
Well, why don't you, refresh our memories and tell us again how, you even met Nelson Nash.
So I was in a master's degree in economics in Northern California and was pretty disillusioned with that path, ultimately towards becoming a professor of economics, but was looking at what people I knew who were in Austrian economics, what other aspects of work they were involved in. Came across Robert Murphy, and he was a co-founder of the Nelson Nash Institute. I didn't know what that was, so started looking into it. Read more into Nelson, got his book, and then started Googling him just to see if he was doing any kind of events or speaking. And fortunately, that was early 2016 when I was doing all this, and turned out that in May of that year, wow, so we're coming up on almost the precise anniversary. I think it was mid-May of 2016. He was doing what I'd later find out was one of his last full-length 2-day 10-hour seminars in a town called Rancho Cordova outside of Sacramento, and he was hosted by Nelson Nash Institute authorized practitioner Kaylin Peterson. And so I went to that event. I had already been had some correspondence with Bob, and so Bob had shared with Nelson who I was. At the time I had committed to a PhD program at Texas Tech, and so what Nelson had learned was that this PhD student pursuing Austrian economics was going to come to one of his seminars.
So Bob warned him.
Yeah, gave him a heads up. But he was so excited and authentically excited, and not like contrived. And sometimes you meet people and you can tell they're kind of putting on a act or whatever. But it's just like from a pure place of warmth and engagement. So he was very excited to meet me, and I was excited to meet him and to hear the seminar. I mean, seeing him speak was a very unique. No one speaks like he did, right? No one could convey a difficult in this case financial, but in any case, in any difficult kind of concept, no one could convey that kind of information the way he could. And so the seminar was like a sight to behold. He had some slides, and maybe he'd glance at them every now and then, but otherwise it was 10 hours of basically extemporaneous talking about the concept and what he had come to learn about money and history and banking function and all of that.
I gotta say that he probably glanced at the slide to make sure y'all were on the right page.
Right, yeah, for our benefit,
Right.
Pausing to make sure that we were keeping up.
Right.
Because he didn't have any problem, even so he was 88 when he passed, but right up until that point, he was perfectly, fully, intellectually, mentally, on point and engaging and
crystal clear.
Yeah. I think I last spoke to him the week prior, after he had told me about he was going to do a heart procedure. I think it was on a Saturday, that previous Saturday. Talked to him ever so briefly. Whenever it was, he was in the hospital. I called just to check in on him, and got Mary, his beloved wife of, was it 66 years, 67 years?
66 years.
66 years. And she was so sweet. It's like, well, Nelson's putting out his hand. He'd like to talk to you. That's awesome. He's sitting there in a hospital bed. Still wants to get on the phone and chat with you.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure he was educating the physician,
yeah,
before he goes under the ether, That's true.
So that's how I met him, and that's kind of how things developed. And
Cool.
And then you met him much earlier. You said you had 15 years.
Yeah, it was, and I'm so grateful and appreciative, and I think my story's out there on YouTube and the big wide world somewhere. But, my first exposure was really, just to his first book, Becoming Your Own Banker, 2-day event, financial symposium, if you will, for financial professionals. And they had a lot of outside speakers and different topics and best practices, and I attended that I'm a student of my profession, economics, and so I attended, and I take copious notes, although I may not be able to read them clearly afterwards. But before I left, I bought every book that the speakers had referenced, because a lot of them, referenced various books. And so I bought them all and took them home, and, they're stacked up on my nightstand. And I finally got around to reading Nelson's first book because it was so thin. They probably sat on my nightstand for several months, and I'd start a book without finishing it. And, seriously, you feel like an underachiever. I mean, things that you want to read, right? Anyway, I read the book that night, Nelson's book, and just after 14 years in the financial world, life insurance agent, investment advisor, I just was dumbfounded. Couldn't believe what I was reading for the first time, right? This concept, I've never been exposed to this idea that you could become your own banker and what that really meant. And after I got over my anger and the sun came up, I called the number on the back of the book. Right, I just wanted to order some books, and Nelson himself answered. At that time, that edition of the book, his face, his portrait, was on the front cover. So now it's just on the back, right? But I was surprised that he even answered the phone, and we had a great conversation, the epitome of a Southern gentleman, and had a great conversation. And it really literally wound up, boy, I hold 10-hour seminars all over the country, and you ought to get yourself to one. So I did, a month or so later. So it was a great initial conversation, much the same as your experience when you first met him. It's, just the epitome of a Southern gentleman, gracious, genuine. And so I went, I think it was in Arkansas, and I was just one in a crowd. He was doing the 10-hour seminar. I'm in the back taking copious notes. And, come to find out that, and so that's really the first time I met him, and then we developed a relationship, right? And had many conversations with Nelson about events and seminars, not just his, but it was not, his 10-hour seminar was not ever meant, nor did it, nor the purpose was never to entertain.
Yeah, they weren't meant to entertain, but you sure couldn't help but be entertained.
Yeah.
When he was talking, just part of his character.
Oh, yeah. He was a, living legend, a persona that genuine. But, from there, I flew home and I restructured all of the life insurance that we owned. And I had been practicing for about 14 years in the financial world, retirement planning, income, blah, blah, blah. So I introduced it to my own life first, and then I started introducing various clients to it. And come to find out that, I thought that, and I still, to this day, I believe everyone should be exposed to the infinite banking concept. You should at least vet it.
Yeah.
Research it, do your own due diligence. But from there, we started hosting Nelson in his 10-hour seminar in Fort Worth, Texas, North Texas, and, some in Houston, here and there. But which really, I'm so thankful because as he would, it's confirmed we lost the camera.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so these 10-hour events, we would host 1 to 3 a year, and we did so for, 10 or 12 years, about 12 years. And that time has just, it's irreplaceable. It's become immensely valuable to me because not only, did you get to participate in the 10-hour seminar, but all the time prior to the event and post the event, picking them up at the airport, taking them back to the airport, the dinners and before and after, and just that, we traveled several times out of Texas, 2 or 3 hours, where he would fly into Fort Worth but he would be presenting his 10-hour seminar in some other state. And so I would just be his water boy, drive him out there. And that's a lot of time that I was able to enjoy with him, and it was just incredible, And then, of course, you develop a friendship. It goes beyond business. And the impact that he's had on, me personally, our practice, the clients and their lives, and then our family. Our client's family is just incredible. And I find myself today, not just today, but lately, not even lately, I have found myself over the last several years, just defaulting to some of the basics of what Nelson's message was and how he conveyed them, clarity and simplicity. You just can't spend that much time with someone and not have them affect your life. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So, but, I'm glad I got to meet him and, and spend all that time with him. He has greatly affected me. And, we even spent some time in Austria. I think back in 2012-ish, somewhere around there. And that's an interesting thing in itself, just to have that opportunity. Well, there are a group of individuals, mainly agents and advisors, as I recall. They were going to, treat Nelson and Mary on a trip to Austria, which is one of his favorite cities in the whole world.
Vienna.
Yeah. And actually, it was the 100th anniversary of Mises, I believe, because that's why we went. It was a Mises event. And,
Could be wrong, but maybe the 100-year passing or the 100-year anniversary of his passing, I think it was.
Is that what it was?
I think so.
Okay.
Could be wrong. But yeah, it was Mises Institute event, and they held a gathering out there in Vienna.
At the College of Vienna.
Mm-hmm.
It was awesome. Had the tour where Mises went to high school and heard some original recordings of Menger.
Mm-hmm.
But, Nelson, he loved Austria. He'd been several times. And just, the camaraderie of that. But here, I got to tell you, these people were putting this together, and they say, "Hey, James, you want to be a part of this?" And the first question out of my mouth was, well, yeah, how much does it cost? And the guy said, well, what does it matter?
Yeah.
He said, do you have life insurance? Well, of course I do. He said, we'll finance it. So I'm like, yeah, duh.
Yeah.
So
take the trip, get on the plane.
Hello. That was cool. Very cool.
Now, you bring up a couple things there. Austrian economics in particular, it's people don't realize that how much of an Austrian economist Nelson was. Really a direct...
Yeah, especially the Austrians, might I say.
Oh, yeah. But a direct sort of intellectual heir to Leonard Reed. So he had such a lengthy relationship with Leonard Reed where he'd fly him down and have him speak to Nelson's people in Birmingham. And just much in the way that you and I learned from Nelson learned from Leonard.
No question.
And that's the same kind of relationship that like a Ron Paul went through with, but it wasn't as personal as I think it was for Nelson with Leonard. But having learned from the foundation of economic education, I just like to challenge my libertarian and Austrian economics friends to realize that Nelson was 5 years Ron Paul's senior and came from the same intellectual atmosphere at FEE, and whereas Ron Paul went political, Nelson went into the financial world and provided a bottom-up solution as opposed to the top-down solutions of Gold Standard or in the Fed or
your Austrian and libertarian friends are still trying to solve the gold problem, right? Mm-hmm. I digress a little bit, but I'm glad you mentioned that. Leonard E. Reed mentored Nelson. Nelson mentioned Leonard Reed. We spoke of Leonard Reed all the time. Leonard wrote many books. He even mentioned Nelson in a couple of his books, but Nelson, couldn't recall which one. So, if you're reading Leonard E. Reed, I haven't found that reference yet. So let me know what book that's in.
Yeah.
But Leonard E. Reed had a hand in founding FEE.
Oh, yeah. Major, like he was responsible for it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So, to be mentored by Leonard E. Reed, and we had this discussion the other day that if you think about the amount of people that like Ron Paul has influenced, right? Because he was mentored by Leonard E. Reed as well. And then how many people Nelson Nash has influenced and from one man? That's extremely powerful.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And one of the, just kind of taking that from there, you mentioned too how all the ways in which you find yourself now talking about some basic concepts that Nelson focused on and put forth. And one of them that stands out to me is just shine the light, be the light. And that's one thing Nelson would constantly talk about is that you got to be the light, shine the light, explain the positive way forward. And I mean that not just like in positive, like as opposed to negative or not good, but positive as in laying the actual groundwork for a solution. And because you could spend all day talking about the state of the industry, conventional financial advice, conventional economics, all that.
The Federal Reserve,
fractional reserve banking, the business cycle, politics, left and right, all of that. You could spend all day talking, and plenty of people do, and entire organizations like the Libertarian Party exist to complain about the problem and put forth national, political, top-down, centralized solutions.
Well,
and you could spend a lifetime involving yourself. and that.
Yeah.
So Nelson was all about set forth the individualized solution and explain how it's done.
And that it is possible.
Right.
At the you and me level, from the bottom up, without top-down thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need Big Brother solving anything.
Or anybody's permission, or having to take a vote on anything.
A license.
Right. Right.
That reminds me, though, of shining the light that way back when I was, I had discovered Leonard E. Reed through Nelson Nash and Fee, and, reading his books and just reading more like iPencil, OMG. You spend 14 years in the financial world and we're never exposed to iPencil. That's a shame.
Mm-hmm.
But there is one video at the time, several years ago, there was one video of Leonard E. Reed, just giving a presentation that was recorded. And he uses the example of the light. It's, excuse me. It was pretty interesting. He turns the light on and, light repels darkness, period. The darkness is, when the light comes on, darkness is repelled, period. And then, shining a light on a wall, or he did it a couple of different ways, I believe. But then, you put a flashlight onto the light. It's just interesting. And so I don't know how many times I watched that video. I think it's been redone by Fee as well. So the same video has maybe been reproduced. But very interesting. Leonard E. Reed, the only video that I know of him.
And Nelson, so the point of all that, Nelson would consistently bring that up, and was an example of it himself. Just
no question about that.
Life and how to put forth, and that's one thing you and I have talked about, just in terms of, regardless, outside of infinite banking per se, or the mechanics of whole life, or any of that, just the method of how to go about conveying a complicated concept. The whole that people, I don't know if it's right to say they take it for granted, but I think you could make the case that some take for granted just the idea of a 10-hour seminar. That didn't come out of nowhere, right? He had to put that together, and it was only after several iterations of other methods of trying to convey what he wanted to convey that he came upon the 2-day, 10-hour format. And so even from just a pedagogical, standpoint about how to teach something or how to convey something, he's really
you throw them big words around.
Yeah, it's only a few syllables. It's not too bad. But he really pioneered a way to, in the digital era, even with all the internet and social media, still had a unique in-person, personal method of conveying a concept. And then even when he finally wrote the book, it's a series of stories, a series of examples of basically illustrations where he's conveying a concept without talking about it directly, right? Sort of teaching in almost like the Christian method of, now Jesus spoke in parables. He's telling stories and conveying concepts that way. And people will read Becoming Your Own Banker, and I've had two reactions, and one of them is, oh my gosh, where's this been all my life? And the other one is, well, it's kind of, it's too hokey for me, or this kind of thing. And I think people who have that reaction have missed the incredible amount of intention behind why things are where they are in the text, and the purpose that those stories that they serve in sequence. And that's all brilliant, to put that's an achievement of its own, to put all that together on top of, or maybe even underneath, infinite banking.
You brought it up, the idea of line upon line, precept upon precept, concept upon concept, and a series of articles. When you read Becoming Your Own Banker, I think a series of articles can be made from that, if one wanted to do so. But he exactly, built concept upon concept. And everything he did that I'm aware of was deliberate.
Oh, yeah.
And intentional, but appeared so casual. You know, the very powerful that, you know, he didn't mince words, misspeak. I mean, I'm not saying the guy was perfect, right? But dang close.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And then, you know, that one concept or idea of being the light, right? Shining the light, reflecting the light. You know, that was one of many fundamental concepts and principles that I've learned from him. And, you know, another being the idea of proper classification, you know, straight from the forestry background and, you know, his background in forestry. It's pretty important that you properly classify things. And that sounds very simple. It's very straightforward. But when you can classify things properly, you're in a better position. You know, and even the article, EVA, we've discussed that before, economic value added. You know, the last line in that article that Sean Tully wrote in, I can't remember if it was Time or Newsweek, Money Magazine.
Me neither.
But his last line, if you know what's going on, you'll know what to do. Very simple, very straightforward. So simple that you can jump over it.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Which is exactly, you know, I see that quite often. People jump smooth over this idea of becoming your own banker, the infinite banking concept. It's not complicated enough. The 92-page book is not scholarly enough or whatever. Yeah. It's like, yep, it's so simple. You might need to read it 2 or 3 times. Right. And then another one is the banking function, a principle, a concept, a truth that is fundamental is banking is. All right, so the movement of money is, and somebody's going to perform that function, the banker. Right? And just the idea that you and me, you and I, us at the you and me level, the individual level, can actually control the banking function in your personal economy is extremely powerful. But if you just jump over that idea, right, because it's, you know, hokey or a gimmick, it's your loss.
Right.
Right.
Or if it's just another method to sell life insurance.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's just another sales tool or sales method or sales gimmick. And you see in the big wide world that there are agents across the country that think, oh, that's a great way to sell life insurance.
That's exactly how they treat it. That's what's in their little messages when they send me LinkedIn messages or emails. Hey, let's have a conversation so you can tell me about your sales system. Or let's not.
Just give me a presentation.
Yeah.
Do you have a PowerPoint that I can use to sell? Oh my God.
Yeah. And Nelson was so gracious about it. You know, he was so warm and accepting. It's like, okay, well, you know, you are where you are, and their understanding will develop. And
they don't know, but they're learning.
But that's IBC, Infinite Banking, becoming your own banker. Nelson's legacy as far as the financial education is concerned was not about selling a lot of life insurance. It just wasn't the point. And when it's treated as a sales system, or my favorite is when agents, oh yeah, we do that. Oh yeah, we do that. You know. You ever read Becoming Your Own Banker? Well, no, but banking with life insurance. Oh, we did that. Yeah.
I did that 20 years ago. Oh yeah, I did that 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Yeah. Oh yeah. It's this idea that you have a life insurance license, or you can spell IBC. You know, you're an expert. Oh yeah, everybody knows that. We did that forever.
It's just so far away from what Nelson was trying to do and trying to accomplish with his book and with his seminars, and so much of his that last quarter of his life, you know, it's just missing the point.
Yeah, actually, though, speaking of selling life insurance, right, or buying life insurance, however you want to look at it, Nelson Nash did more for the life insurance industry than anyone that I know of.
Yeah.
And the life insurance companies, I don't think the majority of them even realize that.
Right.
And, well, go figure. They don't even realize the power of the product
right
that they have.
Right.
So shouldn't be shocked. But and if you think about that for a moment, because we spoke of this, various times, not only the life insurance has been purchased or sold because of the infinite banking concept, but look at the generations and the amount of people that this idea is going to benefit or has touched. It's unbelievable. I know we kind of talked about, Ron Paul and Nelson and being mentored by Leonard E. and how many, effects that one man can have. And it's when you think that through, right? And then you put some monetary values on there, it's staggering.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely staggering.
Yeah.
But
one of the other things that I remember, so I'm sitting here thinking about how Nelson's impact, came through in other areas outside of just the professional or financial. And one thing he always challenged people to do was get rid of their top-down thinking. And that was a personal challenge for me because I used to think that becoming a professor of economics and instructing people in a very top-down fashion was the way to really change their minds and then change the world there, the idealistic idea of, change the world thereafter. That was all top-down thinking. And it took me a long time to shake that off.
Tell them how to do it.
Yeah. Took a long time to just think about, no, that's not the way. Here is the way. Take control of the banking function at the individual level. And for me personally, with that, that means becoming or attempting to become skilled in communicating that concept to just, one-on-one with the individual and discarding this notion of, having to establish the authority or the credibility. I like how he always used to say that, Jesus didn't go get a PhD.
Right.
He just talked person to person.
From the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
Right. And even, Paul had to shake all that off.
Scholar among scholars. Jesus was throwing them out of the temple. Yeah. Wow.
And that's another thing too, is that so much of Nelson, so much of what Nelson talked about was fully integrated. So whether it's how to manage your own personal finances for optimal financial performance or whatever, like that was integrated with what he understood as the broader economic picture from the Austrian perspective. But then it also lined up extremely well, not only with his views on history, but his Christian views too. It was all coherent and had one sort of a worldview that encompassed you could say the correct views on so many things. They all integrated well. And it wasn't piecemeal like so many people have they grab this part of that part of theology or psychology or economics or finance, try to piece together something that kind of looks like a patchwork, when you back up and look at the whole thing. But Nelson's was all integrated.
Yep. Patchwork, something that looks good to them.
Right.
Something they can feel good about, showing others or what have you. No question, it was integrated. You can't separate it. It's like let's go, separate natural law from nature.
Well, and he used to talk about, because life insurance, private contract with free people, and he would jump from that to, come challenge his marriage to Mary, in order to accentuate the law of contract, to demonstrate that the law of contract is how this world built itself up. And you start coming at that, you're going to have a problem.
There will be a problem with civilization. Right. Yeah, he used to, bringing that, talking about that, the 10 Commandments as contract. If you do this, I'll do this. If you don't do this, I'll do this. Right. Constitution, that's a contract, isn't it? I'm not saying it hadn't been shredded. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
private contract is what a position to be in when it comes to your money, operating from private contract. Okay.
Right.
Yep. All right. He also used to say here, it seems like more lately than, going too far back, maybe in the last 6 months or so, he would say that if there's too much emphasis on why, then the how, if there's too much of an emphasis placed on why, the emphasis on how is. I probably should have wrote down the quote. I do have it somewhere, as a matter of fact, and I took a picture of it. But when there's so much emphasis placed on why, it diminishes the value of. I'm sorry. Let me get this right. When there's so much emphasis placed on the how,
there it is.
It diminishes the value of why, and that's not an exact verbatim quote, but you can. And I'm bringing that up because it's a fundamental principle that makes sense to me, and that's what you see going on. That's what I see going on in the big wide world of finance, money, life insurance, infinite banking concepts, becoming your own banker. This emphasis on the how, right? The why is most important. How is important. I'm not saying the how is not important. But the why is most important.
Yeah. I think if you prioritize how, you can get lost in the details. You can get lost in the mechanics. And like you said, not that they're not important, but if you start with why, if you have an understanding of what the purpose is, what you're coming from and what you want to move towards, the how kind of sorts itself out, And that's absolutely true. For Nelson, he was unafraid in his seminar to teach people about the business cycle and fractional reserve banking. And my favorite quote of Nelson's is, I have it in my email signature and it's on my blog. And he got up at Think Tank in 2018, the annual event for the Nelson Nash Institute practitioners, and said point blank, like he does in his very energetic and passionate voice, that banks lend money that does not exist, and that is evil.
Yep.
And it's like mic drop, absolutely, and was unafraid to go there. My point is, he was unafraid to go there. He was unafraid to talk about good and evil, unafraid to talk about the nature of the economic system. It was so nice you in the room. He didn't treat you like you were dumb or like he knew more than you did. He was willing to communicate complicated, or I'll put it this way. He was willing to communicate complex topics with clarity, right? A lot of times in the financial world today, people prioritize simplicity, right? We need to boil it down. We need to make it simple for people, make it simple to understand. So, it's so patronizing. I just can't say. So it's like I refuse to do that. I think Nelson refused to do it. Simplicity was not what he aimed for, as far as I could tell. It was clarity. He wanted to communicate things clearly. And if in the end that meant that it seemed simple, then fine. But he conquered and would explain super complex topics but he did it with clarity and was unafraid to do so, and didn't assume or presume that his audience couldn't understand it or couldn't grasp it. And that's I bring that up because it's such a contrast to what else is out there today. Just because we're talking about the way he would communicate a concept, how he would teach, being a quality of his own in his own right, outside of IBC in particular. It's really admirable. He elevated people's understanding. It was not about...
And their thinking. He elevated their thinking. You covered an awful lot right there, right? And if I could go back to the, in a seminar, being bold and unashamed, I don't know how many times I had heard him say, and he would talk about his relationship with Jesus Christ, and if you didn't have one, that was the most important thing, and he'd be willing to talk to you.
Say we got something to talk about after the seminar.
Exactly. You might have an opportunity. He was always politely, gentlemanly, gently bold.
Yes.
And then in that audience, if you were to attend a 10-hour seminar in an audience of many, you always had the feeling of one and the connectivity.
Oh, yeah.
And then he would talk about Leonard E. and, Leonard would go somewhere hosted and be presenting or speaking. And, the crowd typically wanted to be entertained, but there was always that one, that remained after the event, after the talk. And that was worth everything. That was the most important conversation, that connectivity with one, the audience of one. And Nelson made you feel that way.
Absolutely.
That, there was a direct connection, and that he was speaking to you, and he literally was.
Yeah, it wasn't fake. He was.
Right.
Yeah. He was talking to everybody individually at once.
Yes, that's powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, he could command a room for sure.
Yep, no question. All right.
Well, I think I mentioned all the pieces I wanted to mention. I could go on all day about how he was a personal and spiritual mentor. Seeing him, he and Mary served as an example of what marriage can be, and certainly his Nelson, the patriarch, had a extensive family, great grandkids all over the place, and to be able to, for me, is to be able to, just where I am in my life, is to see that example as not only as a Christian man, but as someone who was a family man and served his family, and that example will live with me forever.
Sure. My thoughts kind of going forward, I believe that God's timing is perfect. Whether as an individual or human being that, it makes sense to you, or you can see with clarity, or understanding, or have the understanding with clarity. And, just kind of, as I mentioned earlier, moving from the informational kind of knowledge-based, knowing that, Nelson graduated, and we'll see him in the next lifetime. There's this life and one more, right? And the impact that he's made on my life personally, and our practice, and our clients, and our families, and the industry, the life insurance industry, and the field of economics, and all the theories out there, and the Austrian school of economics. Very powerful, very powerful. And two, I feel that I have some kind of connectivity with Leonard Reed through Nelson Nash. And, in going forward, I really hope that people that didn't have an opportunity, and I believe that they will, I really hope that the people who didn't have an opportunity to meet Nelson, I hope and I believe they will, or can, find some kind of a connectivity with Nelson from his work, even though they didn't get to meet him. And I hope that is true. I believe it to be true. If you discover the work of Nelson, and you go through his work, and you understand, what he did, you're going to get a sense of who he was. And I think that's pretty cool. And I think so. To wrap it up, my point being, he has touched and affected a tremendous amount of people, right? And I think he will continue to have a positive effect. And I think and I hope that someone who didn't have the opportunity to meet him will find that and feel that connectivity. So
absolutely.
And then too, let me say that another kind of a thing that, as we spoke through the years, we always talked about pushing back the frontiers of ignorance, and which is what I believe that we do. And a positive side of that is pushing back the frontiers of ignorance, right? So it's not in a negative way, right, or a disparaging way, pushing back the frontiers of ignorance. I think that's a worthy goal and a worthy
Absolutely.
cause. And then we would always, talk. It's like, what are you doing, boy? Well, I'm doing, I'm pushing back the frontiers of ignorance. That or I'm just doing my part. And I think, my part is important. Your part is important. Whoever you are, my part is important. And so that's exciting. I'm looking forward to doing my part. I'm going to continue to do my part. That was often in conversation, and I'm excited about that. And I think with this moving from kind of the information, knowledge-based understanding and knowing that, Nelson has graduated, and just going forward, I can see, that God's timing is perfect, and being self-centered, without being egotistical, right? That I think that, my part's in front of me, and I'm excited to embrace that.
Yeah, we've got a role to play. He left work to be done.
He did.
Yeah.
Right. So
we better go get to it.
That's what I had. Yeah. All right. So I had fun.
Me too.
Hope you had fun.
Yeah.
Come back for the next time. Can't wait to see you.
Thanks for listening. See you next time.